Go. I'm Iris Ruth Pastor here with Dina Roth Port for a little small talk. And Dina is a freelance writer, a journalist, and an author. And we're going to be talking about her newly released book, Previvors, Facing the Breast Cancer Gene and Making Life-Changing Decisions. So welcome, Dina.
Thank you so much for having
I
me.
understand that you previously worked at Glamour magazine as a health editor, and you reported on things like breast cancer, colon cancer, autoimmune disease, depression, eating disorders, abortion, a whole host of things. And I'm wondering why you picked breast cancer to write a book about.
About 3 years ago, I was living here in South Florida, and I was working for national magazines, and I was approached by 5 women living in my community. They told me that they were previvors, which was a word I had never heard before. And they explained that a previvor is a person who has not had cancer but has a predisposition to develop it. So they basically told me that they were all previvors who had taken steps to lower their risk. However, while they had each other to rely on while they faced their risk, they didn't have one quintessential guide to really help them through all the emotional, psychological, and physical issues they faced. So they asked me to write a book for previvors. And after I met with them, I went back home and I went on the computer and started doing research about this woman looking at breast cancer. And as a health writer, I was shocked. There are thousands upon thousands of women out there who have a high risk for breast cancer, and they just don't know what to do. They don't know what steps they can take. And they really don't have that resource out there that could help them. And to be honest, as a woman, I was angry because I know far too many women who could have been helped if they had a resource like this. They should have known that they were at risk, and they should have known what steps they could take to protect themselves, but they found out too late after they were diagnosed with breast cancer.
So with that being said, you talk about how the face of medicine gives you so many options, but it's also like opening a Pandora box of dilemmas. What did you mean by that? Is that because there's so many choices once you're diagnosed?
Yes. Well, when someone's a previvor, some women are previvors because they test positive for what's known as a breast cancer gene, but namely BRCA1 or BRCA2 mutation. Other women find out they have a high risk because of family history or other risk factors. But when you talk about these genetic mutations and family history coming into play, then each decision you make, it's not just for yourself, it's also for your family members. For instance, BRCA mutations are genetic. So if you find out you have a BRCA mutation, that means you inherited it from either your mother or your father, and you have a 50-50 chance of passing it on to each of your children. So it's not, these aren't black and white issues. You really have a lot of issues to face, and that's what the book sets out to do, is really help women through each step of the way. But no one's saying these are easy issues to face, which is why women really need resources.
A couple of things that you talk about that prompted questions in my mind is, first of all, is the BRCA gene, is it a Jewish thing? Is there a link to Jewish people being more receptive to this?
Yes, absolutely. People who have BRCA mutations, anyone could have a BRCA mutation. And in the general population, it's somewhere around 1 in 500 people have a BRCA mutation. And when a person has a BRCA mutation, that increases their risk of having breast cancer in their lifetime up to 87%, and ovarian cancer up to 44% in their lifetime for women. And for men, it increases their chances of prostate cancer, melanoma, and even breast cancer, which is rare in men but can still occur. Now, while it is around 1 in 500 in the general population, among Ashkenazi Jews, that rate is 1 in 40, which is why it's so crucial that we start a dialogue among our communities, because it's very prevalent and it's scary, and it afflicts far too many families in the Jewish community.
I know that reconstruction is known to be very complicated, and it can be painful, but for women who opt for reconstruction, what is their overall emotional state when they're going through it and afterwards?
Well, again, that's very difficult, and it's a very personal decision, and there are a lot of different issues that women will face if they choose to undergo prophylactic mastectomy and then choose to undergo reconstruction after that. They do have a lot of options, and thankfully, in plastic surgery, it's not just about creating a breast, it's also about creating a breast that looks as natural as possible. So for instance, the 5 women in my book, they all opted, they all preserved their nipples, they were all able to achieve beautiful cosmetic outcome, as well as not 100% eliminating their risk, but eliminating their breast cancer risk as much as possible.
I want to ask you one other question. What are some non-surgical options that women could consider?
Yes, absolutely. In my book, Previvors, there's a lot of decisions that need to be made, and obviously prophylactic mastectomy is the one option that will most dramatically reduce your risk of breast cancer, but there are other options. Some women choose to make lifestyle changes, which are changes we should all make, frankly, to increase your exercise and have a healthy diet and limit alcohol, and making changes such as that. You could also increase your surveillance, which isn't going to prevent you from getting breast cancer, but it will help you catch it in its earliest, most treatable stages. So you might want to add MRI to your annual regimen. You might want to get mammograms more often and at younger ages if there is a BRCA mutation in your family. So again, these are all things that you should talk to preferably a genetics counselor about, because they're really trained in this area. And you could also, there's also an option called chemoprevention, which is basically taking pills that can lower your risk up to 50% of breast cancer. So there are many options, all of which I detail in the book, but it's such an individual choice. But I always say that we're lucky as a generation that we have these options, because years ago women were just blindsided by breast cancer, and now we can actually take steps to learn our risks and what we can do to truly protect ourselves.
Dina, in your book, you also talked about men having breast cancer, also that men can be a carrier of this gene. And what can men actively do to protect themselves from getting breast cancer?
Yes, it's true. There's actually a chapter in my book entitled The Hidden Killer in Men, because men just don't think breast cancer will affect them. And the truth is it does. Men are just as likely to have a BRCA mutation as women are. It is 50-50. So if you, number one, you need to look at your father's side of the family as much as you look at your mother's side when it comes to family history. Now, a man with a BRCA mutation is at higher risk for prostate cancer and breast cancer and other cancers as well. And they should definitely talk to their doctors about what steps they can take to protect themselves, and possibly screening for certain diseases more often than the average man. However, what's crucial is that if a man has a strong family history and thinks they might have a BRCA mutation, they should consider testing, because if they have children, even if their children are men, you don't want the BRCA mutation to get hidden within a family. One of the women in my book, her name was Lisa, and her grandfather died of breast cancer. Back then, they didn't know it was breast cancer. They just called it a tumor on his chest. And he died, and years later, her mother was put on hormone replacement therapy, because they never indicated to her doctors, never told her that she was at risk as well because of her family history. And she wound up being blindsided by breast cancer, and she died as well. And it turned out that she did have a BRCA mutation, which she inherited from her father. And that's the fear, is that if you don't acknowledge it yourself, and if men don't take that step, that it could really affect their future grandchildren, their daughters, and it's a scary thing. And for those women, the risk is much, much greater for breast and ovarian cancer.
So do you advocate for men doing self-examination of their breasts and things like that for any types of lumps?
Yes, if a man, especially if he has a BRCA mutation, that he periodically check himself, and if he notices any changes in his tissue, his breast tissue, that he should definitely notify his doctors. And it really does affect men too, and I think men need to really know that. Thank you so much for having me. And I think these issues are all very scary for women, but the bottom line message is that we need to choose empowerment over fear and take charge of our health in ways that previous generations never could.